was
This meeting is being recorded.
I think I was muted maybe when I started.
I thought that the problem was my end, but if that's the case,
Yeah, I've just unmuted myself. I'm sorry. So I'll start again. I do appreciate the interest in this talk and you're recruiting me, John. We thought that we'd put this problem behind us with the end of the Cold War, but unfortunately we haven't. And President Putin has reminded us of that, and also now we've got a growing confrontation with China, which could go nuclear as well, because of especially because of Taiwan. So a couple of years ago, a group of us decided that it was important to educate the physics community, help the physics community educate itself on this again, and to see whether we could help Congress
Right now.
get educated on this again. I think somebody has to mute themselves. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to talk about the danger, and then about the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction, in case some of you might be interested, and maybe if some of you are interested, maybe we could stay for a few minutes after my talk, if you want to learn more about the coalition. So this is an outline of my talk. I won't read it for you. You can have a quick glance. But I'm going to start with the consequences of nuclear war. And as you, as professionals dealing with risk assessment, you know that risk is probability times consequences. And so I'll get to probability as well. But consequences of nuclear war, as we all know, could be horrendous. In 1961, we had only one nuclear war plan, and President Kennedy asked the head of what was then the Strategic Air Command, now Strategic Command, how many people a single integrated operational plan would kill. And it turned out that they had done a calculation, and they estimated 400 million people in the Soviet Union, China, and East Europe, plus about 200 million in West Europe, Japan, and South Asia, depending on which way the wind blew. Now, US megatonnage is down by a factor of 10 today relative to what it was in 1961. But on the other side, that 1961 estimate did not include the effects of fire or economic collapse. And the total consequences, best estimates are that the total consequences of an all-out nuclear war today, including those indirect effects, could be billions of deaths. Well, this can be illustrated by what would happen if Russia wanted to destroy the Pentagon with one of its nuclear warheads of 500 kilotons, half of a megaton, 500 kilotons, 500,000 tons of chemical explosive equivalent. If you scale the blast radius from Hiroshima, you get the red circle. If you scale, there's a different scaling law for the heat. And if you scale that, which really determined the area of, there was a firestorm in Hiroshima after the bombing. If you scale that, you get the outer circle here. It's almost to the Beltway. So we're talking about one bomb causing 1 million deaths. Now, there was a debate over whether or not to develop such bombs in 1949, when after the first Soviet nuclear test. The question was, should we go for more powerful bombs? The Hiroshima bomb was about 15,000 tons of TNT equivalent. And the advocates for going to thermonuclear weapons, where you're using fusion as well as fission, won out in that debate, even though the advice that was given by the General Advisory Committee to the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, the AAC was the predecessor of today's Department of Energy, and then as the National Nuclear Security Administration.
I signed up for this.
Is somebody trying to tell me something, or they're not muted? So the General Advisory Committee to the Atomic Energy Commission said the thermonuclear bomb is not a weapon which can be used exclusively for the destruction of material installations of military or semi-military purposes. Its use, therefore, carries much further than the atomic bomb itself. The policy of exterminating civilian populations. I mean, I find that very chilling, but the pressure, the fear that this first Soviet test instilled in us still drove us to actually develop these more powerful nuclear weapons. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course, were pretty bad already. So then there's radioactive fallout. And this is just a scenario showing that, that for the so-called counterforce attack, an attack in this case by the US against Russian nuclear-related targets, especially for the targets which are so-called hard, the missile silos. I'll talk about those later on. You produce huge amounts of fallout, and even without hitting the cities, which in fact are included in the war plans, as the Pentagon must be included in Russia war plans. Radioactive fallout would kill about 10 million people by itself. And then more recently, we've started thinking about the climate impact, and this is an issue which came up in the around 1983. It was popularized by Carl Sagan. Very primitive climate models at the time, but some people have now used modern climate models. And if in fact, in this scenario, there were 400 megatons of nuclear explosions on cities, and they produced 100 megatons of soot, which is boosted into the stratosphere by firestorms, then you would have a real climate impact. And on the top figure here, you see the growing seasons, different lengths of growing seasons with different colors, and you see that afterwards on the below, with the effect of the sun blocking soot layer in the stratosphere, that the growing season in the northern hemisphere, most of the northern hemisphere, is like that of Antarctica before before the soot was raised into the stratosphere. So that would means essentially no growing season at all, and they all in another paper this same group then used a model to look at you know, as a result of the starvation that would result as a result of the decreased availability of food, and on the assumption that trade would come to a halt, trade in food and between countries, and that people would use, in this case, eat half of the digestible feed that's currently used for animals. So it's pretty bad. Consequences are pretty bad. Now, with regard to probability, my main concern has been accidental nuclear war, and one possible cause of accident is the posture in which we have our intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the Soviet and Russia does, and perhaps soon China will as well. Now, on the left map here, you see these in the red ovals. That's where our ICBMs are today, in 3 fields. We used to have more, but thanks to arms control, we're down to 400. And on the right, we have what they actually look like. They're the ICBMs are in so-called silos, hardened, very hardened silos. They're hung to isolate them from the shock of nearby nuclear explosions, and they have very robust covers. But as the Soviet Union's missiles became more accurate, our confidence in the survival of these hardened silos declined, and as in the 1970s, in the late 1970s, as a temporary measure, our government decided to put these on a launch on warning posture. Now, the time that a ICBM from the Soviet Union would take to get to these missiles is 30 minutes. For a submarine-launched ballistic missile would be less. So the president would not have very much time to decide on whether or not to use this launch on warning option. In fact, less than 10 minutes. President Bush Jr. said, you know, that wouldn't be enough time to get off the crapper, in his inimitable way. But that temporary measure turned out not to be temporary. Now we're 40 years later, more than 40 years later, and they're still in that posture. And there's plans now to replace these aging Minuteman missiles with new missiles, which would be in the same posture starting around 2030 for another 50 years. So this makes some of us nervous. There have been false warnings of incoming Soviet attacks. And the Soviet Union, we know at least of one false warning that the Soviet Union had of an incoming US attack when their new early warning satellites detected the sun reflecting off of clouds over US Great Plains and mistook it for the infrared plumes of ballistic missiles coming in their direction. In the 2 most famous cases and most public cases of US false warnings, the early warning crews took 8 minutes rather than the 3 minutes that they were allotted to confirm that the warnings were false. and thereby they saved the world, but they were fired. Another sort of false warning happened in 1983 at a time of high tension between the US and the Soviet Union. NATO had its annual exercise, which it's just had actually, again, a nuclear exercise. And it was taken as real by the Soviet command. And they loaded nuclear bombs on Soviet fighter bombers in Eastern Europe for a preemptive attack. Fortunately, the exercise ended before they pulled the trigger. But it was a close call. Then there have been nuclear threats in military crises. In 1961, there was a crisis when East Germany and the Soviet Union blocked our access to West Berlin. And ultimately that crisis was resolved by the East Germans building the Berlin Wall. Their problem was that everybody was leaving and via West Berlin. But that crisis caused the next, in my view, caused the next crisis, which was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because during the 1961 crisis, the Kennedy administration, with its new reconnaissance satellites, had discovered that the Soviet Union was not ahead, as had been thought in developing ballistic missiles, but it had only 4 ballistic missiles, and we had, I think, already hundreds at that time that could reach the Soviet Union. And so we warned the Soviets that we knew we had nuclear superiority. Well, their response, the response of Premier Khrushchev, was to try to equalize things by bringing medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles to Cuba. And that caused the Cuban Missile Crisis, where President Kennedy estimated that there was about a 50% chance that we would have gone to all-out nuclear war. And he didn't know everything that we learned subsequently about the crisis. And now we have President Putin. I think they've downplayed their threats, the Russian threats of nuclear attack against NATO or Ukraine. But he's brought the issue up again. And technology moves on, and we have a new danger that's developed with our computerization, which is hacking and the possibility of hacking of nuclear command and control. So, one answer that people thought might work would be ballistic missile defense. But in fact, we spent a lot of money on it, but in fact, it would be ineffective. This figure shows, and also it has been provocative. I think it's one of the causes of China's buildup. China had very few missiles. The theory was that if in fact they could threaten a few U.S. cities, that would be enough to deter us to resort against nuclear missiles against them. But then our missile defense and the possibility that we might figure out how to make it work convinced them, was one of the things that convinced them that they had to build up. And I'll talk about that. Just an example of one of the many countermeasures that you can devise against interceptors that intercept are supposed to intercept warheads in outer space it comes from the fact that in space light things travel as fast as heavy things, and so you could conceal a warhead in a balloon and surround it by other balloons and just overwhelm the defense. Recently, I participated in an American Physical Society review of ballistic missile defense, the current and proposed U.S. ballistic missile defenses, and we concluded that few of the main challenges involved in developing and deploying a reliable and effective ballistic missile defense have been solved, and many of the hard problems we have identified are likely to remain unsolved during and probably beyond the 15-year time horizon we considered. So the alternative is arms control. Well, here you see the history so far of the number of warheads that primarily U.S. and Soviet Union and now Russia have. But you see that there are 7 other countries that on the scale of the U.S. and Soviet Russian stockpiles, are sort of indistinguishable from the bottom line. But they have hundreds of warheads each, or up to around 100, some less than 100, some hundreds. And you see that with the end of the Cold War, things did get better. We went down a lot. And in terms of actual deployed nuclear warheads, you were down to about 10,000. But that's still an awful lot. And it appears that maybe that decline has ended. Now, one of the new developments has been that China appears to be building up. In 2021, both I don't know, the government may have seen this before, but NGOs discovered that there were missile silos being built, hundreds of missile silos being built in China. And at the same time, we've been in a developing confrontation over Taiwan. They've drawn a circle there, and the roughly 300 missile silos being built, and in the lower left-hand corner, we have the most likely missile that China would load into those missile silos, the DF-41, which could carry 3 warheads. So the DoD is projecting that China by 2030 or so will have 1,000 warheads up, that can reach the United States up from 100 or so today. This shows the history for the U.S. and China, the number of deployed long-range ballistic missile warheads. You see that the U.S. has come down, and now recently China has been coming up. Now, globally, this is the situation with regard to nuclear armed and nuclear weapons free and countries and countries in between. There are 9, as I mentioned, 9 nuclear weapon states in historical order: the United States, Soviet Union, UK, France, China, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. So those countries are in black here. In green are countries which are parts of nuclear weapon-free zones, and all of South America, South and Central America, Mexico, and all of Africa have declared themselves nuclear weapon-free zones. There are a few former nuclear weapon states, South Africa and Belarus, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, which had inherited nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union. And then you have the countries in the red, which are under the US nuclear, so-called nuclear umbrella. That is, the US has told those countries, you don't need to have nuclear weapons. We will, if nuclear weapons are needed to defend you, our nuclear weapons will be available. And that's NATO, the NATO countries, and Japan, South Korea, and Australia. So that's the situation we have today. And then there are, in the Middle East, there are a few countries that are not nuclear weapon states, but also not umbrella states, or in nuclear weapons free zones. Actually, yes, that's right. So, what I'm the nuclear arms controller. What would I do about this? Well, we made a deal with the non-weapon states in the Non-Proliferation Treaty, now more than 50 years old. We and the four other nuclear weapon states that are permanent members of the UN Security Council, we made a deal that we would pursue nuclear disarmament in good faith in exchange for those other countries, 186 of them, not acquiring nuclear weapons and accepting IAEA verification on their nuclear activities. Well, they've been complaining that we haven't been living up to our commitment. And in fact, some of us were afraid that the Non-Proliferation Treaty would fall apart as a result. But instead, the reaction has been the non-weapon states have doubled down. They are now, I think 60 odd of them have joined, have created and joined a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. They're trying to put pressure on us to get on with nuclear disarmament, us and the rest of the nuclear weapon states. So things we could do. One is no first use. China actually has a no first use policy, and other countries wouldn't necessarily. And in the case of China, the U.S. doesn't necessarily believe that. But the virtue of that is that your own military has to plan on the possibility that you might mean it, and therefore not think of nuclear weapons use as a way to get out of tight fixes. Have alternative plans in case we get into a military tight fix. Another thing, another I think risk reduction policy would be no launch on warning. In the case of the U.S., that should be easy because 2/3 of our nuclear warheads that are deployed are actually at sea at any time and untargetable on ballistic missile submarines. And so, in fact, if the Russians attacked our ICBMs in the Great Plains, they would lose more warheads than we would. I think seeing how we've actually seen how ballistic missile defense makes nuclear arms control more difficult, we should limit offense. We should limit ballistic missile defense. In fact, the first arms control agreement we made with the Soviet Union in 1972 linked limits on our ballistic missile defenses to limits on both of ours. Linked limits on both of our ballistic missile defenses to limits on our offense. That's the way we were able to get to an arms control agreement. Unfortunately, when at the end of the Cold War, President Bush the Younger in 2002 took us out of that treaty, and that's Russia and China have both been complaining and justifying new weapon systems by our defenses. We need to continue arms control with Russia. We only have one agreement left, with nuclear arms control agreement left with Russia, the so-called New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, and that expires in 2026. And we need to engage with China in nuclear arms control. Now that China in the past has used the excuse that we have so many more warheads than they do, that when we reduce down to their level, they'll join us in arms control. But now they're building up to our level, and I think we should tell them it's time. Now I've been giving this talk. 10 of us have been giving this talk, or variations of this talk, around the country more than 100 times, and it's been mostly physics colloquiums at universities. And so I have a few slides which show, conjure up historical contributions that physicists made. But I'll go through these very quickly. The first one was Niels Bohr, the great physicist of the last century. And he actually understood the problem during World War II and tried to get, before the nuclear weapons were a reality, tried to get the US and England, we were joint, our nuclear weapons development program, the so-called Manhattan Project, was joint with the United Kingdom. He tried to get the Roosevelt and Churchill to start talking about nuclear arms control with Stalin during World War II, and unfortunately he failed. Then there was the Russell-Einstein Manifesto. The last thing that Einstein signed before he died was to call on scientists to assemble in conference to appraise the perils arisen as a result of the development of weapons of mass destruction and to discuss a resolution. And that led to this so-called pugwash movement, which pioneered in suggesting making arms control proposals for a number of decades. Then there was the contributions to ending nuclear testing. On our side, it was the leader, the scientific leader was Linus Pauling. On the Soviet side, it was Andrei Sakharov operating as an insider. Both of them got Nobel Peace Prizes. Sakharov for not for his contributions in this area, but for his contributions in defense of human rights in the Soviet Union. I guess because you're health physicists, Sakharov made an estimate. Both Sakharov and Pauling made estimates of how many cancer cases would result from atmospheric testing. And this is, and scaled to the megatonnage of atmospheric tests that happened before we had the atmospheric test ban. About over the half-life of carbon-14, a long half-life, Sakharov estimated about 3 million cancer cases, and that he underestimated the I think he estimated a higher global population than we estimate today, but he underestimated the cancer risk coefficients, and so I've revisited those estimates, and they're pretty good now. Hopefully, of course, we'll cure cancer long before the half-life of carbon-14, and so that will become irrelevant. And then there were physicists who actually went public after, as a result of the President Johnson, or actually would-be President Nixon, saying that he was going to use the fact that the U.S. was behind on ballistic missile defense compared to the Soviet Union as a cudgel to beat President Johnson over the head in the 1968 election. President Johnson decided that the U.S. would deploy ballistic missile defenses, and then the scientists, some of the science advisors, went public and to explain why these defenses would be ineffective, and Congress became convinced of that, and that it would be a waste of money, and pulled the plug on that program, that first program. And then this is something that I was involved with. We did actually get a comprehensive test ban. The hang up with getting a ban on testing underground was various arguments that those tests could be muffled, and we wanted to have in-country inspections. The Soviet Union was paranoid about that, but when Gorbachev came in, things became possible that hadn't been possible before, and it actually a U.S. NGO of field seismometers around the Soviet test site in Kazakhstan, and that convinced Congress that it was worth pressing for a comprehensive test ban, and we did get one, even though it's not been ratified by the U.S. It's been complied with since 1998 by every country except for North Korea. And then, of course, the pressure to end the nuclear arms race during the Cold War wasn't just from scientists. There was a grassroots movement in the early 1980s to freeze the nuclear arms race, and there was a similar movement in Europe. There was a demonstration of 1 million people in New York City, because New York is the UN headquarters. And I like this banner because it was saying 177 out of 195 Vermont towns voted for the nuclear arms freeze. It shows you what a grassroots movement was. It was, and I think this actually helped convince both Reagan and Gorbachev that it was time to get on with nuclear arms control and reductions. So that was 40 years ago, though. And the activists moved on to other issues, especially climate change. And so did most members of Congress, except for those who have districts and states with nuclear weapons jobs. And we are actually now rebuilding our whole nuclear weapons infrastructure, and have really turned our backs on nuclear arms control. This shows the budget projection. And well, the historical defense budget as a the nuclear weapons budget as a percentage of the defense budget, and you see a peak on the back half of the peak associated with the Eisenhower-Kennedy buildup, and you see a peak during the Reagan-Bush administrations, and now we are in a new high expenditure period as we are replacing all of our nuclear weapon systems with modern versions. And other countries are also modernizing. So in view of the situation, in 2020, a group of us began to organize and give talks like this to physics groups, mostly universities, to recruit people, physicists, to educate themselves, and then help educate Congress about the dangers and how the dangers can be reduced. At this point, we have about 900 physicists signed up, and we in our first round of issues was to advocate for extending the New START agreement, which was about to expire in February 2021, and it was extended. There was a move to resume U.S. nuclear weapons testing. We opposed that. We advocated for no first use policy. That didn't fly. And now this physicist coalition is independent. After it was started out with sponsorship of the American Physical Society, the Professional Society of American Physicists, and now we are we were pushed out of the incubator, and we've also broadened to recruit more scientists, not just physicists. And if any of you are interested, we'd welcome your interest, and if some of you would like to hang around afterwards and to learn more about the Physicists Coalition, I will. Just if there are young people among you and in academia, we consider graduate students, postdocs, and assistant professors young. Then we actually have some fellowships, next generation fellows, we call them. I show the website here, physicistcoalition.org, and we're in a development mode still. We want to establish chapters like you have, courses, and partnerships with other groups interested in these issues, and developing sustained advisory relationships with congressional offices. So I think this is the end of that's the end of my talk. So I'll stop screen sharing and if let me just how do I get rid of this? Oh, Chris Rastampur is with us, and Chris is our manager of the Physicists Coalition, so she can speak to about the Physicists Coalition as well. Let me just okay, go to gallery. So, John, how do you want to handle if is any Q&A?
I will keep an eye on the chat box. I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. Looks like Bill Blakely has a question.
Okay.
Hello. I've enjoyed your talk very much. Thank you very much. I've read, stories that describe how close we were during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where a submarine captain was blinded by light and came real close to launching a nuclear missile to a U.S. attacking forces. How much of that history is true? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, that it is true. They actually had the Soviet Union had some submarines accompanying ships, and the U.S. had a task force out there. And the submarines had actually torpedoes, nuclear armed torpedoes. And the U.S. task force decided to try to get them to surface, and started dropping hand grenades on them just to notify them that we would like to meet with them upstairs. And they mistook those for depth charges, and they were out of sorts anyway, because the submarines were very hot in the Cuban waters. And so the captain of one of the submarines said, "The hell with it, I'm going to go up and use my nuclear torpedo on the aircraft carrier that was the center of this task force." And it just so happened that the commander of the whole task of the group of submarines was on that submarine, and he countermanded that order. So that was just one of the ways in which the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we didn't know until years later how close the Cuban Missile Crisis.
As a follow-up, I also have read that McNamara, years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, later found out that there were 98 nuclear warheads deployed to Cuba, where officers of the rank of major actually had the control keys to launch nuclear weapons. Is any of that fact?
That's also true. The situation was that in addition to the missiles that we knew about that were being deployed, the Soviet Union had sent over battlefield nuclear weapons in case the U.S. invaded Cuba, and we didn't know about that. I can't remember exactly the short-range missiles, I think, which could have been used against our ships coming to Cuba. And that was another thing we only learned about later. There were actually a series of conferences in Cuba where veterans from all three countries of this crisis got together and shared information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just read the next question that's in the comments. It's from Andrew Scott. It says, how accurate are the numbers on Chinese warheads in your estimation? Could China, have many more than we think?
I don't think so. We have a pretty good estimate of how much plutonium they have. And that sort of puts an upper bound on how many warheads they could have. And also, it looks like they are planning on restarting plutonium production for weapons. They stopped that at the end of the Cold War, but now they're restarting. It looks like, and that indicates also that they need more. And so I think that they have hundreds now, and they're heading for maybe 1,000. Is probably a ballpark, a pretty good estimate.
Well, I'm going to ask a question of my own, since I don't see any others here. Obviously, one of the motivations of revisiting this topic is the conflict in Ukraine, which to someone like me feels like a fundamental change kind of in global security. Do you agree with that? Do you think that anything is different, or is this just a new level of awareness for some of us?
Well, it is a fundamental change since the end of the Cold War. There's no question about that. However, we've had nuclear weapons threats before. I mean, the U.S. actually was for a long time the main culprit, and we threatened to use nuclear weapons during the Korean War. We threatened to use nuclear weapons in the Vietnam War. We threatened China before it had nuclear weapons when there was a crisis over Taiwan. So, so Putin isn't uniquely bad. I mean, he's a throwback, I think, to the bad old days. When people thought that this was a sensible, a reasonable thing to do, and I hope we're emerging into a new era when we realize what a crazy thing that this is to do. And in fact, I think there's almost an emerging consensus that if in fact Putin used one or two nuclear weapons, that we would respond with conventional weapons, rather than escalating and responding with nuclear weapons. We could, for example, destroy the Russian nuclear forces, the Russian forces in Ukraine, and I'm not sure exactly what people are thinking about, the scenarios people are thinking about, but something along those lines.
Great. I think the next question is there's a hand up from Monica Lemon.
Yes, hello. First, Professor, thank you for speaking tonight. I really enjoyed your talk. I am a recent graduate with my master's degree in non-proliferation and terrorism studies, and I have not heard very much about the field of health physics. It's kind of frustrating at this point, where it seems like it's so prolific in non-proliferation, and I'm learning more about it as every day. But I wanted to ask you if you see, or if you're anticipating any trends in the field of health physics with the conflict in Ukraine and the world as it's changing. Are there any trends that you're anticipating?
Well, I think I'm the only person in the room who's not a health physicist, so maybe I should refer you to John or somebody else to respond to that. Or if you like, or anybody who wants to follow up later, just give my email. It's FV Hippel as for Frank von Hippel at princeton.edu.
If I like to jump in there, so we recently had our annual meeting, and a big discussion was, the job trend in health physics, and so there are a lot of people hiring right now. People retiring, and people are really in a crunch. So, I guess to answer your question, is there are opportunities out right now because people are desperate for HPs, especially at the entry level. And I don't think it's being dictated by the situation overseas per se. It's just with retirement and COVID and people just deciding not to come back to work, a lot of agencies are looking for health physicists. So, the opportunity is there. You can go to hps.org for more information. Also join us. Our website is bwchps.org. If you join our listserv, we frequently email job opportunities. That's a lot of our members will send in opportunities as they arise. And a lot of times we get first exclusive information before the job is even posted that we send to our members. So those are two great ways to get linked in with the industry. And trust me, once you join either website, you'll be inundated with opportunities and information about the field.
Thank you, Carissa. If there aren't other questions, I mean, maybe could Chris Rustam introduce herself and
I see one more question in
Okay.
the
Yeah.
chat. So if you don't mind, let's address that and then turn it over to Chris.
Sure.
So this is, it's not from Bill Beal asks, does the coalition have a considered opinion on reducing the threat of tactical / one-off use of nuclear weapons? Looking at the website, it seems mostly predicated on the case of mutual use of strategic weapons.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've been focused on reducing the risks of strategic weapon use, but the Ukraine crisis raises the issue of the possible use of the shorter range nuclear weapons, so-called tactical nuclear weapons. They're tactical nuclear weapons. It's really not necessarily they're not necessarily that much lower yields. Many of them are. We used to have nuclear explosives that could be fired out of guns, out of six-inch artillery pieces during the Cold War. Today, they're typically bombs. On our side, the only tactical nuclear weapons we have left are bombs, and which can have more than 100 kilotons of nuclear yield. Russia has a much larger variety, and I think that's partly because we switched to, we decided we didn't have to blow up the whole neighborhood to destroy a tank, for example. After we developed precision guided munitions, and so we're pretty comfortable about abandoning tactical nuclear weapons. But I guess in terms of arms control, we have not yet had agreements. We actually, something interesting happened at the end of the Cold War. George Bush Sr. saw that the Soviet Union was going to disintegrate and didn't want to have 17 nuclear armed states emerged out of that. And so he said that we were going to eliminate our land-based tactical nuclear weapons, the Army tactical nuclear weapons, and in the hopes that Gorbachev would reciprocate and eliminate the Soviet Union's land-based tactical nuclear weapons. And that, you know, during the Cold War at the peak, the US had 7,000 nuclear weapons in Europe, tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. So there were a lot of these things, and the Soviet Union had a lot of them too. And Gorbachev did reciprocate, but the Soviet Union still has a lot more tactical nuclear weapons than we do. The numbers and the total numbers are about the same because the U.S. has a lot more. We believe the U.S. has a lot more warheads in reserve, strategic warheads in reserve than Russia does. So I think there have been proposals to get tactical nuclear weapons on the arms control agenda formally, and I think that's the way to go. Is just to, I think they should be easier to get rid of than the strategic weapons.
Okay, it looks like there's one more question that came in under the wire. And it says, are there concerns about the efforts of Iran and Korea leading to conflicts with major powers?
Yeah, North Korea has been a real problem. Their view has been that we've been threatening them with nuclear weapons. We did threaten them a long time ago with nuclear weapons, and in any case, between us and the South Koreans, we would be far superior to them in conventional weapons. So that they see nuclear weapons as their lifeline. I mean, just having a nuclear deterrent is their lifeline, and so it's going to be a major task, I think, to deal with that, and to persuade them to get rid of their nuclear weapons. It's going to be, I think, it's going to be a long term. We might have had a chance at it during the Clinton administration, but now it's a long term problem. And in the case of Iran, Iran hasn't crossed the line, and we were able to constrain Iran in the nuclear deal that we made with Iran, that the Obama administration made with Iran. Unfortunately, President Trump took us out of that agreement. The Biden administration has been trying to get us both back in, but there's been so much going on that we haven't accomplished that yet, and the chances are getting kind of dim, and Iran may go nuclear. And I think we've been threatening, the Israelis have been threatening to bomb their nuclear facilities if they cross a certain line. That would only delay Iran going nuclear at this point, and perhaps by not that much, and I think could actually decide them to take their to go all the way. So far, it's been what I call a latent deterrent that they could go nuclear, just like Japan could go nuclear. Japan has enough separated plutonium to make 1,000 nuclear bombs if it wanted to, and I think some in Japan see that as a latent deterrent. And at the beginning, Iran was saying, "Well, we're only doing what Japan has been doing." So that's a tough problem, and made tougher, by everything that's going on now with Iran helping Russia with sort of not a revolution, but uprising in Iran against the government. Everybody's distracted now. Thanks.
Well, thank you. I think, I mean, is this probably be a good time for Chris to speak? If anyone is going to sign off at this point, I'll just, say a couple closing things. If you joined us for the first time, I put the chapter's website is the first comment in the entire conversation. So please have a look. As Caressa mentioned, we do this, we basically try to have a monthly meeting for the academic year, September through May, and an annual meeting in May. Dues are currently $5, so it's a pittance to join the chapter. And our next meeting will be on December 15th. David Connolly is going to talk about government relations and, legislatively and from a policy standpoint, what we might expect, coming up. So that'll be the next talk. But, thinking about this, a lot of the people who are presumably participating tonight and, members of our chapter or health physicists in the DC area are the folks who are thinking about and would be dealing with the aftermath of any kind of nuclear incident, or, we've been thinking a lot about reactor security in Ukraine. And it sounds like, for me to just, give my personal reaction, it sounds like, involvement with the coalition or paying attention to these advocacy efforts are, perhaps a way to address some of those concerns really at the root and at the front end, rather than simply assessing doses and directing cleanups, after the worst has already happened. So I think let's, Chris, if you have any comments, and let's continue to talk as long as people are interested.
Sure.
If I could just, by way of explanation, I think we're making a transition here for those folks who are interested in learning more about the Physicists Coalition. That's the transition we're making now, and Chris is the manager of our Physicists Coalition. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Well, first of all, thank you, Professor Von Hippel, for your wonderful and informative talk. And thank you to the Baltimore Washington chapter of the Health Physics Society for organizing this talk. My name is Chris. I'm the Policy and Communications Coordinator of the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. I'm honored to be working with a wonderful group of experts who have come together for a common cause, which is probably why a lot of you are here, because they're concerned about the threat of nuclear weapons and are willing to take time out of their lives to basically make sure that they're advocating for policies that would reduce this threat. I don't have a lot to say. I would say that if you are interested in conversations like this, we do host webinars and other kinds of events every now and then. And the way to stay informed is to join us using the link that I dropped in the chat. It's also simply just www.physicistcoalition.org/join. One thing that we have been doing most recently, where you can, if you have these concerns about the threat of nuclear weapons, especially in light of the current political crisis and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the nuclear threats by the Russian President Vladimir Putin, which has also escalated the conversation from the American side to the point that President Biden warned about the possibility of Armageddon. is the way that you can take action and show that you're concerned is by signing on our statement. We are currently collecting signatures from fellow scientists who share the same concern. And hopefully, once we have a sizable number of signatures, we can present that to policymakers or politicians and show them that there are citizen scientists who care about this cause. Yeah, that's pretty much most of what I have to share for now. But if there are questions, I'll be more than happy to answer. One thing that I also wanted to add was that I know there was a question regarding the coalition's position on certain things. I'd like to remind people that our coalition is a network of scientists who have come together. So each member obviously holds their own personal opinion. That said, we do have this page where there are some positions that members of our steering committee have taken in the past. So you can take a look at this page and see those stances. But yes, that's pretty much what I have to say for now. But thank you for holding this talk and for inviting me to join.
Thank you, Chris. And I guess unless there's any questions that people have, Chris or I could answer. I guess we may have gotten to the end.
Well, we are very grateful for you both for taking the time to be here. Thank you very much, and have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for all who joined. Have a great evening.